Yo, Vaporman here. My next guest has a decade of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, especially in areas of research and development, artificial tissue engineering, biotechnology.
Come with me if you want to live.
Quality control, and regulatory affairs. She is currently the chief scientist of a company called Myriad Pharmaceuticals, amongst others. She researches in the fields of toxicology, public health, pharmacology, chemistry of nicotine, safety, quality, and even non-nicotine e-delivery systems. Remember, smoking anything is bad for you. She's also the Chief of Standards of the Vaping Trade Association of New Zealand and a board member of the United Kingdom Vaping Industry Association. I've just scratched the surface here, but as always, time is of the essence. I give you a truly remarkable individual, and most importantly, an actual scientist who uses actual evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Eliana Golberstein Rubashkyn. Elena, Chief, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Vaporman, and I'm very happy here to kind of like help you in understanding a little bit the complexities of the chemical world.
Oh, Vaporman's an idiot. He needs all the help you can get. Now, my first question is, are you or have you ever been in the employ of Big Tobacco?
No, I haven't been employed by Big Tobacco. I actually, and you didn't ask, but I actually work for pharmaceutical companies. I mean, it's obvious. I'm a pharmacist and I'm a scientist in this field. So yes, I work in big pharmaceutical companies.
Now, obviously, you work in the vaping industry. And have you ever vaped or recommended vape to a family member or a close friend?
I actually don't vape on a regular basis. Maybe I do it because of curiosity or just kind of testing, because I developed this thing, so kind of like out of curiosity, but I don't use it on a regular basis. I don't need nicotine. I definitely don't find it pleasurable. Actually gives me kind of headache. But yes, one of the reasons why I'm in this world is because my mom smoked for 52 years and vaping, and actually vaping nicotine salts, and especially 4th generation devices, which are kind of like very new to us, were the final thing that helped my mom to stop smoking. And after seeing how her health improved, and after seeing how she managed to actually be free from toxic emissions from smoking, and after seeing how everything improving her health, the oxygenation, the lung capacity, how her COPD improved, I became a very strong and passionate advocate for vaping, because I saw the miracles happening in the person that I love the most, which is my mom. And I must say that my mom actually was smoking while she was pregnant with me. So I'm a byproduct potentially of whatever harm causes smoking while a woman is pregnant.
A lot of people have a lot of fear about nicotine and vaping in general. I think if they can see the good that it does in people's lives, that would go a long way to alleviating some of those fears. My next question, I got a bit of a prop here. I know you're from New Zealand. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this product or not, if you use the Marmite, but This product, Vegemite, which is, you know, brighter, rosy can be, on your cheeks and whatever, right? But this product has high levels of vitamin B3 or niacin and high levels of sodium. Now, the reason I bring this up is it doesn't require a prescription in Australia. If health experts in this country were consistent, should it?
And I don't know if you would be surprised with what I'm gonna say, but actually niacin is it's kind of like a sister. I will say like a daughter of nicotine, because it's called nicotinic acid, and it's called nicotinic acid for a reason. Just give me a second. So this is my friend nicotine, and when my friend nicotine gets oxidized, especially in plants, what happens is that this bond here, sorry, this looks messy. This bond here in between these two kind of rings gets split in two, and then this part gets oxidized. And when you oxidize this molecule in this way, you are actually making nicotinic acid, which is vitamin B3. So you can say that when you oxidize nicotine, you can make vitamin B3. Therefore, you know, it's bad, because nicotine is bad and everything that comes out of nicotine is bad. And you would be surprised if I tell you that plants use internal mechanisms to transform nicotine into vitamin B3, which we actually use, as a way of like being healthy. So you eat a lot of tomatoes and vegetables because they have a lot of vitamin B3. But you will be surprised if I tell you that they also have nicotine, which is something that also the plant needs for various reasons, like insect repellent, if I'm not wrong. It's one of the reasons why plants make, nicotine. But yeah, so if such a thing has really high levels of vitamin B3, you would think that you will need a prescription in Australia. But I think it's just that you need to have a little bit of perspective of why vitamin B3 is there, why it's used, and what is the benefits of having vitamin B3 on it, and also sodium. Sodium can be very problematic. It can cause so many problems, especially with people that have hypertension. And I wouldn't recommend that to someone who has hypertension. My mom has hypertension. I will not give her Marmite and Vegemite, but I don't think I would put a prescription for Marmite because I think that would be very stupid.
Also, just to add, sodium is a antifreeze. There's a lot of countries around the world that put salt on the roads to melt some of the ice off the roads. So it contains antifreeze and nicotinic acids, and yet we encourage kids to eat it. Some of these arguments from these tobacco control people are a bit crazy. I did have 2 follow-up questions on that though. Number 1, how did you get a nicotine molecule that big? And number 2, shouldn't you be wearing gloves while you're handling nicotine?
Well, it definitely depends on the concentration of nicotine that you're using. Not definitely when you are making 3 milligrams per ml or 6 or 12, because actually it's not necessarily a problem. I would say that when you have concentrations of nicotine that go above 4 or 5%, then you actually need to be more careful. And why I'm saying this, I'm actually using evidence. We have an international system to understand toxicity and and also how harmful a substance is, because you can say something is toxic or something is harmful, but you need to have a basis for that. And we use the GHS system, which is the globalized harmonized system for understanding a little bit toxicity. So approximately the toxicity of nicotine. So nicotine at concentrations of 3 milligrams per ml, which is kind of like, I would say 20 or 30% of all vape juice that most of vapers use, which is 3 meg per ml, is actually not even classified as toxic. So you can actually, I'm not saying that you can drink it because I'm not recommending that, but in the way of understanding like toxicity is you can't even say things like maximum you can say is harmful if swallowed. But for 3 milligrams, it doesn't even trigger that. It's simply considered non-toxic. It's considered non-toxic. From 6 milligrams to approximately, I would say 36 milligrams per ml, you can say it's harmful if it's swallowed. It's harmful, not toxic. And from 36 milligrams and ahead, you can actually start using the word toxic if swallowed. Okay, and this is based on a formula that I have here, which is called the toxicity formula, which is analyzing the toxicity based on the LD50s and also LC50s, which is for inhalation toxicity and also for ingested toxicity. Obviously, these 2 kind of toxicities are different, but yeah, what I'm trying to tell you is that toxicity, it depends on the units that you use, and actually there are ways to understanding what toxicity is. You cannot just simply likely say something is toxic. You need to actually use a reference model for toxicity, because that's how we actually understand toxicity.
All right, Chief, you can keep secret how you blew up a nicotine molecule to be that size. I understand there are industry trade secrets and whatnot, but I've been wondering about the differences between Freebase nicotine and nicotine salts. One is more quickly absorbed than the other, but I heard conflicting information. Are nicotine salts more addictive or more harmful to health? And what is the big difference between nicotine salts and Freebase nicotine?
As pharmacists, and I will say this in general, we play a lot with the chemistry of a substance, because we understand that it's not just a substance that has an effect, but also the atomic side of things, which is the absorption, the distribution, the metabolism, and the excretion of that substance in your body. So you are a human being that have your internal processes. And as pharmacists, we need to make sure that a substance is suited to, interact with your body. Okay. So the problem with Freebase, which is what I'm holding right here, is that Freebase has a relative high pH when you are actually putting it in contact with water or substances like water, like your mucosas. That's why when high concentrations of nicotine enter in contact with your mucus, it causes that pH to cause kind of burns, kind of like a sort of burning feeling. And that could be a bit of a problem. That's why when we have substances like that, not just nicotine, I'm speaking about metoprolol, which is something that we use for managing blood pressure. I'm speaking about we have thousands of substances that we have in our wards as pharmacies. We actually modify them just to make them more more gentle to our body, like in the way they absorb and interact with our mucosas. So following that logic, in order to make nicotine, the absorption of nicotine more easy and actually to cause this irritation, to stop that irritation, we changed this nicotine by creating a salt. So something we call salts. And when we create a salt, what happens is that we, for instance, we change this nitrogen, which is an ion that you can generate ions with this, and you can generate the other ion. So you create salts, which are not different like the salt that you use for your kitchen in the logic, which is sodium chloride. In this case, it's this acid, which is an organic acid. In this case, is acetate. And then we have nicotine, and you create a salt with these two, okay? Because this is low pH, high pH, they interact, and they actually create a salt. What happened with these salts? When you create a salt, they can actually navigate through your airways more easily because they are dissolved in the VG, because they are not very volatile. This substance is very volatile when you heat it, but when you make a salt of it, you can actually not make it volatile. That's why salt, the one they use for cooking, is not volatile, because of the same reasons, okay? And what happened, one of the reasons why we also use nicotine salts, not just because of the process of actually making it less what is the word? Less volatile. Actually, what we are helping your body to actually put it deeper into your alveoli and helping that process of absorption to be faster. But on the other hand, when you actually combine these two molecules in our body, we have normally we have buffers that actually change this molecule into freebase and into the organic acid that we combine it with, and that freebase actually passes very quickly to have the effect on our body, which is what actually is the active part of the molecule. And because that process happens in specific parts of our lungs, we're actually making that absorption faster, okay? Because what happens is when you are actually inhaling all the nicotine gets absorbed in your mouth, in your throat, and that erratic absorption doesn't allow you to have high peaks, which is what you get when you're actually smoking. So that's why nicotine salts recreate the process of smoking, because that nicotine gets absorbed at once in specific parts of your body, and it happens all at once, not erratically. So you can actually achieve peaks in blood.
Okay, quick follow-up on that. So what you're saying is free-base nicotine gets absorbed into the bloodstream a little bit more slowly than the nicotine salts, which are absorbed into the bloodstream a little bit more rapidly. But once the nicotine hits the nicotine receptors in your brain, is there any difference between nicotine salts and free-base nicotine?
They are essentially the same, but the pharmacological effect is achieved only when you interact with these alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. And the more nicotine you have in your blood, the more likely this interaction will be. So when you are vaping freebase at 3 milligrams, yes, you will generate an activation of this nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. And for some vapers and some smokers, that's enough. But for people like my mom, less likely interaction of that nicotine with this receptor will not be enough for my mom. Someone like my mom, and potentially someone that is a heavy smoker, that interaction needs to be more likely to happen. Actually, that interaction needs to be more. So you need higher concentrations, okay? And those concentrations sometimes, or I would say sometimes no, are not possible to be achieved with freebase because of the limitations that we have with freebase. The only thing you can do is to inject yourself with nicotine, and I'm not recommending that to anyone, but that's the only way to actually mimic the effect that you get from a combustible tobacco or with nicotine salts, which are designed to replicate or mimic the effect of that combustible tobacco.
All right, gotcha. So it seems to my layman brain that it goes a little bit something like this. Freebase nicotine gets absorbed more slowly. So it's like having something against your cheek and your gum to absorb the nicotine slowly over a prolonged period of time. Whereas with the nicotine salts, it's more like when you're smoking a cigarette and you get the rush of nicotine quickly. Although with vaping, you don't get those 7,000 deadly chemicals that you do from smoking. Moving on, next question. There have been reports in the ABC of late about the dangers of vegetable glycerin. You're a chemist. Could you tell us a little bit more about vegetable glycerin and whether or not it's dangerous?
So it's so dangerous that you make it, your body makes it, and actually your body has a whole infrastructure in the cells to process it and actually to make it again. Because it's part of the multiple cycles that we have in our body. It's an essential molecule that our body needs for designing the structures of the cell, for designing the glycerids, the triglycerides, which is something that our body also does. So when you say that such a substance is so harmful, first, even in the GHS classification, the international classification system, VG is not considered harmful, toxic, nothing. It's a substance that is simply considered non-toxic. Obviously, the dose makes the poison, and I can kill myself if I ingest liters and liters of glycerin. But once again, it's a substance that is harmless if you compare it with other more toxic substances. Even when you inhale it, even when you inhale the vapors of it, you cannot say that it's harmful. The only thing that you can say of glycerin being harmful in any meaningful way is if you are toasting it, if you are burning it, and you are inhaling those vapors. I think I have an explanation here. This is the thermal degradation of the glycerin. If you heat it too much, what happens is that you recreate something in chemistry we call dehydration. So you can generate acrolein, and acrolein is actually not a good substance. Acrolein could be harmful. It's actually a substance that is known for being harmful and actually a possible carcinogenic. Okay, it's in a category, but you can only generate this reaction if you actually heat it at really, really high concentrations. You heat it at really high temperatures. And you generate this substance here that I'm highlighting here when you smoke, because glycerin is part of every living being. Every living being has glycerin. So the tobacco leaf was a living being. Therefore, there is glycerin in the tobacco leaf. Therefore, when you heat it to a burning temperature, then you will generate acrolein. And obviously, that's a substance that it's a byproduct of combustion. But believe it or not, it's not necessarily very prevalent in vaping. It depends on how the person is vaping. If the person is toasting it and using a really high voltage and burning pretty much all the e-liquid, then it's likely that that person is generating that substance.
Right, but even then, you're still going to be getting more of that substance, the dangerous substance you were talking about, from smoking a regular combustible cigarette than you would from vaping a vaporizer, even at higher temperatures.
Yeah, you will still get it, definitely. And at really, really magnitudes higher. I'm speaking about at least 100 times higher than even if you are toasting your VG on your vaporizer.
Right, gotcha. Clear as crystal. If you got a hydrogen bomb and you replace the hydrogen with vegetable glycerin, then yes, VG is very harmful to your health. Australia and New Zealand have some of the highest tobacco taxes in the world. Many in tobacco control laud this as a great success and act like big tobacco corporations are reeling from these high taxes. What effect do high taxes have on tobacco profits?
I'm not particularly familiar with that, but I can simply say that the effects are actually more on the poor people and those vulnerable that became more vulnerable when they actually are punished for depending on nicotine. And what you actually do is just to generate maybe a perpetuation of that poverty, because the higher the tax or the higher the prices of cigarettes, the more expensive your dependence on nicotine will be, and that's going to translate in you being more poor and just all the social ramifications and financial ramifications from that. So it is happening here in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the highest prevalence of smoking is in our indigenous populations, our First Nations people, which is the Maori, especially women. Approximately 32% of women smoke. So if you are making them more poor, because it's 1 in 3 Maori women are being more poor because the taxes increase, then that's really bad. I think that's why New Zealand was a little bit more pragmatic in their approach with vaping, because they understand that if we are going to make the prices of cigarettes really high, we actually need to have a product that people can resort into in order for them to keep somehow handling, whatever dependence they have on nicotine without affecting their lives. Because people will not simply just stop smoking just because the prices of cigarettes are like $100 a packet of cigarettes. Okay, so I think New Zealand was a little bit rational in that sense. What is the point of increasing the prices of cigarettes? We are not giving people an option B, because the option C, which is quit or die, because that's kind of like a little bit Australian approach. That's not human. That's not a human approach. It's a little bit of I don't care approach. I don't give a F approach. And I'm glad that a little bit the New Zealand government understood that actually you need to give people an option, because we are free beings. We are individual beings. We have the right to choice and the right to decide whether we want to stop smoking or stop using nicotine altogether, or keep using nicotine or whatever. And I think that's what actually Australia needs to start doing right now.
A bit of a constipation theory here. I think it's just another great way to put another tax on poor people. It's not too much different in Australia. 50%, close to 50% of our Indigenous population smoke cigarettes. 50% of people with mental illness smoke cigarettes, and the majority of smokers come from low socioeconomic groups. Next question. What effect do high prices have on addiction? Is there any evidence to suggest that the price of a drug makes it less addictive?
Yeah, I wanted to complement a little bit my point as well, because I still cannot believe that people are not understanding that there is that people with mental health conditions, they have a really high prevalence of use of nicotine products all over the world. And this is happening everywhere. It is happening back in Colombia, where I come from. It's happening in Russia. It's happening in China. It's happening in everywhere in the world. Even in populations with really low levels of prevalence, you find that people with mental health conditions are actually significantly overrepresented in the use of nicotine products. My question is why we as scientists are not questioning the reason behind this, okay? Why somebody without mental health issues is not needing nicotine as much as someone that has mental health conditions. Okay, I leave this question because I really find that somebody needs to a little bit navigate more in this truth, because there is something that nicotine has that somehow is helping these people in a specific way that I don't want to navigate in that, okay? But not answering your question, well, when you increase the price of something to a ridiculous level, what happens is that you are giving it the black market more reasons to be successful and to succeed. So, you can make as expensive as you want something to a point in which actually you can criminalize the possession of that something, and you will just create a black market that will make that substance so profitable that actually gangs and criminals will profit from it. And then you will create more harm, which is unintended consequences from that. Yeah.
Yeah, a recent report on Channel 9 said that tobacco has higher profit margins than cocaine does, even though tobacco is a perfectly legal drug in this country. Recently, I also did another video on a scientist who, when I asked for evidence, said that the paper was peer-reviewed, which leads me to my next question. Is there a license or a way to become a registered scientist? Do arguments from authority lead us any closer to the truth?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, authority means pretty much nothing unless you can have 100% of, like you are 100% part of that field of science. When somebody is speaking about toxicology, or when somebody is speaking about chemistry, an example is Glantz. Glantz it's an engineer, okay? He's not even a scientist. He doesn't even know chemistry in the high detail that it needs to be, like you need to understand chemistry, or he doesn't even understand the human body or how smoking disease occurs, as a doctor, because he's not even a doctor. Okay, he did a PhD in outer space or something like that. And then he is an authority, and then he speaks with so much of freedom about things that are not even a field that he's knowledgeable enough. And that's something wrong, because he doesn't understand many things and how comprehensive can be chemistry. Because I can read you all the ingredients that make an apple, okay, and I can name you like all the 300 different components of an apple, and it would sound so harmful to you, but it's actually something that you eat with no problem. But someone like him that believes that because he has a PhD on aerospace or something science, that all these nothing to do with bodies and chemistry and nicotine, then that doesn't give you that right, to kind of understand about that. Now, science, when you study science, when you study a field of science, or even if it's natural, or even if you study social sciences, because you actually can make science from social sciences a little bit, like in natural science, you can predict more. But science is a pursuit of knowledge, understanding, and you need to have objective observations, evidence, experiments, gated data, make an assessment, and do a repetition analysis to make sure that what the hypothesis that you're testing is actually true. So anyone can be a scientist as long as somehow they have a basis on science. And like, how do you analyze the evidence? Because the way of making science is that you have you ask a question, you have a research question, you have an hypothesis, you test that hypothesis with an experiment, and if you find that you get the result from the experiment that you're doing, that you can analyze the data, and then you can draw conclusions. And if the conclusions go against your hypothesis, then you can actually start questioning why your hypothesis was wrong at the beginning. Or then if they align with your hypothesis, then you can communicate in any way results. One of the problems with science, if you have a negative or an hypothesis, a result that goes against your hypothesis, you don't publish. Okay? Or if you actually start building your research from the results and not from your hypothesis, because this is what all the anti-vaping scientists do. They actually want vaping to be bad, so they start drawing conclusions and they start building all the research from the conclusions. So I want to conclude that, I don't know, vaping is more harmful than smoking, which is something that Glantz has said many times. So they would draw their conclusions based on, like, they would start drawing all the papers back from the conclusions. I want to get there, but I need to find my way there. And this is something that we call a confirmation bias, which is something that you can be subjected to, I can be subjected to, Glantz is obviously subjected to, but he's subjected to that confirmation bias because he's corrupt. Because I can be subjected to confirmation bias just because I'm maybe an ignorant person, or unintentionally, maybe because I work in this field, somehow maybe I only can see the good things out of it and not the bad things, or actually I have a preference towards the positive signs of vaping and not the negative, even though I believe that a good scientist is someone that can actually navigate in both worlds and trying to kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate, because at the end of the day, science requires people to be skeptical. If you are not skeptical and if you are not able to actually question yourself, you cannot call yourself a scientist anymore. Just stop being a scientist. If you have the absolute truth, and your absolute truth cannot be debunked or somehow cannot be questioned. Like Chapman, he has a truth, and it's a truth that he's been holding for 40 years. If he's not able to question himself, but he always uses this confirmation bias, because he would find always a reasoning for what his position's been for 40 years, and he's not able to actually recognize the truth that is uncomfortable in his political affiliation, because he definitely has a political affiliation, then I cannot call him a scientist anymore, because he's ignoring how the scientific method works.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about confirmation bias. I think confirmation bias, that is looking for the answers you want and only accepting any evidence for the answers you want, leads to cognitive dissonance. And this is a real problem, because science is about reality. Science isn't a religion where there's some priest at the top like Chapman or something that just proclaims what he thinks ought to be the case. Would it be great if nobody on the planet relied on nicotine for whatever mild stress relief or whatever other reasons they use nicotine for as a social lubricant or whatever? Yeah, probably, but that's not the reality of the situation. And just preaching on and on about children or about how vegetable glycerin is toxic, even though it's produced within the body naturally, is just ridiculous. Following up on that question, the scientific method, in Vaporman's opinion, is the best way to determine reality, using evidence, reason, and logic. But some who claim to be scientists do not apply evidence, reason, or logic, and instead apply emotional arguments. How robust is the peer review system in weeding out bad and biased research in 2020?
Unfortunately, is not really good, and there is a lot of problems with publication. And I think a lot of scientists I work with, they will agree with me. And I will say that, I mean, I find it ridiculous that as a scientist, if I want to publish something, I need to pay an editorial to put my article in a database. Okay, that's first. And you, Vaporman, have to pay to access that article, but that money doesn't go to me. That money goes to that editorial. And at the same time, knowledge is not being passed through. And then the person who do the peer review process or is part of the peer review process also doesn't get paid for doing that work. There is only one person or one body that is making money there, and is that editorial. And that editorial has a lot of money. It's actually, that industry is kind of like a $20 billion industry. They're making money out of capturing the knowledge of someone, and it's not actually allowing that knowledge to be free. If I want that knowledge to be an open article, I actually have to pay more money for it. So you can actually read my research. And if you stop using those, knowledge gatekeepers, or those who are keeping the knowledge on how valid or not valid, because they are pretty much the people who say that this knowledge is valid or not valid, they are actually not doing anything. If you remove them out of the equation, as a scientist, I can publish my article in, Twitter, and I can get other scientists, great scientists, a lot of great scientists are actually in Twitter. They can actually do immediate review of my article and say, this is wrong, this is right, this is not right. And actually, a lot of prep brains are linking the Twitters down there. So you can actually, on real time, you can start checking, oh my God, yes, they are right. Like this study that find out that vaping is, the more you vape, the more likelihood of COVID-19 or whatever, it was full of methodological errors, okay? And then you can actually just go in the preprint that they actually published, and you can see how a lot of people are saying this is wrong, this makes no sense. How come that almost half of the tests for COVID-19, according to your sample, was done on people that is like 18 and 24, like the youngest cohort of the population? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so it doesn't make a statistical sense that half of the tests for COVID-19 are used or wasted on the people that are less vulnerable to COVID-19. So you can actually understand that maybe I did a selection bias, or when I designed my survey, my online survey, people were answering as pretty much like, oh yes, I feel like I got COVID-19. I have a runny nose and I'm very special and I'm so special that definitely I have COVID-19. And I answered yes in that questionnaire. So yes, I mean, there is a lot of problems with the science method. There is a lot of, not with the science method itself, but as humans, we actually corrupt everything. We corrupt everything with our beliefs. I corrupt everything with the way I see the world, because I want everything around me to be a reflection of the view I have of the world. If I hate people for being fat, then I will hate, the consumption of calories, and I will actually forbid people from consuming, high calories or things like that, and I will create taxes on sugar and all that stuff, because this is my view of the world. Okay, if I have a very puritanic view of the world, nobody should be enjoying life in any meaningful way. Nobody should be drinking alcohol. Nobody should be using nicotine. Nobody should be using sugar. Nobody should be enjoying life in any meaningful sense. Okay, and I can translate my personal view into the scientific method, and I can use all these different bias, which can be intentional or unintentional, because you can actually do science. You can be a good scientist, you can have a good heart, but you can actually make your method wrong, and that can give you or lead you to wrong data that actually you will interpret in the wrong way. Okay, so science is imperfect. It's actually quite imperfect. It is impossible to find good science. Only good scientists are the ones that actually identify those very mistakes. And actually a good scientist is the one that recognizes those mistakes, and is the one that recognizes that that the knowledge changes constantly. Okay, is what we know about nicotine today is not the same what we knew about like 40 or 3 years ago. Okay, because it's as simple as like if you have nicotine here and you have a smoke here and you combine these two, and then everything these two are causing is cancers and all these things. But if you're not able to isolate factors and actually understand that it's the smoke that is causing cancers, not the nicotine, then actually you will have a different perception of reality. But sometimes you don't want the truth to be known because that truth can be uncomfortable, especially if you spend 40 or 50 years of your professional life demonizing nicotine. Okay, it's like all the meaning in life is gone.
And some truths can be unprofitable as well. It really annoys me when people who claim to be scientists or are giving public health advice block people and refuse to speak to them. Because this isn't even just necessarily something that is intentionally, devious or corrupt. It can just be somebody having the wrong view. But if you shut off communication to people, you're never going to be able to come to truth, come to an understanding. So it's a really big issue, not just with vaping, but with many other issues in our society today, in my opinion. My next question is, apparently there is a vaping epidemic of under 18 people in the United States of America. In the US, they have lower taxes on their tobacco products, and they have none of the plain packaging laws we have here in Australia. And comparatively easier access to vaping products than we have here in Australia. You cannot access nicotine in Australia without a prescription. My question is, in which country are smoking rates higher for under 18-year-olds, Australia or the United States?
Australia.
Even though the taxes are higher and we have the plain packaging, there are more per capita, there are more under 18-year-olds smoking combustible cigarettes, even though they have all the fruit flavors, they have the ugly olive packages and all this sort of stuff. More Australian kids smoke cigarettes than in the United States.
Yeah, and I will give you an example that it's actually a US experience that it just happened. I think 3 or 4 days ago. They are releasing the data on the cigarette consumption and vaping consumption on the 12th grade students in the United States. The CDC data during the pandemic, kind of like since 2019 and 2020, since the EVALI, the vitamin E issue started.
Acetate, yeah.
Right, kind of like up to May was kind of like when the pandemic was just kind of starting. So the use of cigarettes among 12th grade students was actually increased, the consumption of cigarettes, because all the demonization of vaping and vaping is bad and vaping is equally harmful than smoking make those teenagers that somehow anyway will result in whatever, if they want to consume nicotine or in whatever taboo they want to play with, because it's pretty much about taboos or doing things that are risky or whatever. So 31% increase in cigarettes in the past 30-day use, but vaping actually decreased from 12% up to 38%. So juuling, which is the use of Juul, decreased almost in 40% in that period of time. So actually, there are more people smoking now than people that were juuling in the past. So they're actually inverting that proportion back again, in which more people are actually smoking, or like those teenagers are actually coming back to cigarettes because they are demonizing. They're doing a good work actually in demonizing vaping in some way or another. Which is, I don't know. I think it's just the opposite of what you want. If somebody wants to use nicotine in any way, I would definitely prefer them to. Even if they can get nicotine out of patches or gums, I would be fantastic as long as it's not smoking, But what's happening in the United States is that people are smoking more, they are vaping less, and I think that's a concern. That's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, the way I liken it is, imagine that every corner store, every petrol station, every supermarket sold injectable caffeine, and yet somebody had the brilliant idea to actually put it in a liquid and drink it, and the government wanted to make that prescription only whilst continuing to sell the injectable caffeine. It's madness, it's insane. Chief, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How can people get into contact with you? What do you got coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I usually like to join you, like different YouTubers like you, and I'm gonna have a video soon with another YouTuber, hopefully soon. But definitely, if you guys want to contact me or like follow me on my Twitter, it's Eliana Rubashkyn. You guys can follow me on that. And yeah, I'm more than happy to kind of like answer your questions. There is unfortunately not many people of my field involved in the vaping industry. So I actually want to, I recognize that because I feel a little bit isolated in this world of vaping with my profession. And I'm more happy to actually be on your side to advocate and to help you answering all those questions that you have.
Well, knowledge is power. Chief, I'm so glad that you are on our side. There are a lot of things today that I didn't know, but if you don't know, now you know.